Thanks everybody for being on. This one's going to be a treat. I'm pretty excited about this one. So today we have Pam Owens, Director of Fitness at Royal Oaks Country Club. And we also have Derek Hooper, who is Director of Instruction at Royal Oaks Country Club. So we thought this one might be kind of cool to let them speak about how that synergy and how the communication works for the golf coach and the fitness coach, making sure that everybody's on the same page and kind of has some like goals. So a little bit of info on these two. So Pam is pretty much a badass when it comes to fitness, and then especially kind of has got a nice niche in golf fitness. So if I read this correctly, so over 25 years, correct, Pam? Yeah, so you have to commit to that one. So she was the first level 3 TPI fitness instructor in Texas. So that kind of shows you that she was kind of in the forefront of trying to dig in and jump into this, what golf fitness really meant. She's a top 50 best Golf Digest, top 50 fitness professional, a contributing resource for a lot of different places like TPI, Golf Week magazine, functional anatomy seminars, expert in kin stretch. And then we've got Derek Hooper, Director of Instruction, like I said, best in state, Operation 36 Master Golf Coach, our 2021 STPGA Chapter, Harvey Penick Teacher of the Year, GRAA Top 100 Growth Award, STPGA Player Development Award. He's a member of the US PGA as well as the Australian PGA. So happy to have these two here. Thank y'all, and we'll let you run with it.
Al, thanks for the introduction. First of all, thank you everyone for being here this morning. I appreciate your time is valuable, and it's great to have as many people on the call as we do. We were going to talk through this morning about how Pam and I work together to help our players improve. We wanted to work through, first of all, the why that you need to, as a golf professional or golf coach, work with a fitness professional. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the how that synergy works. And then to finish up, we were going to talk a little bit about some of the hesitancies that we've heard over the years from golf coaches and professionals about their concerns about working with a health professional and how that might work. So typically the relationship with a player starts off with the golf professional. In my case, the student would come along and I do an on-course assessment with them so that I can see them play from tee to green and start to figure out where their strengths and weaknesses are. And once we've done that plan, we then get back together and we start working together on the range. And from a golf coach's perspective, as you would all know, like we tend to work from the outside in. And what I mean by that is that when I get together with a student for the first time, I'm looking at ball flight first. I want to see where's the ball starting, how's it curving, what's the trajectory of the shots. From there, I work back to, well, how is the club interacting with the ground and the ball to produce those ball flights? And then the third step for me is then how is the player moving to have the club move that way to produce those ball flights? So for us, it's very much an outside in, whereas Pam's going to talk a little bit more from her side, how it's a little more from the inside out. She's obviously a little more concerned with how the body moves so that it can then move the club and the club can then move the ball. I think that it's important for us to recognize, or for me anyway, when I'm working with a student, is I'm trying to figure out when I meet a student for the first time, where are the swing issues that we're seeing coming from? So the questions for me is it technical, is it physical, or is it conceptual? So initially I'm going to start with a player and I'm going to ask lots and lots of questions about their understanding of what they're trying to do and why the ball's doing what it's doing. Because a lot of the times I'm finding that players are actually doing what they think they are supposed to be doing. And their move faults that we're seeing are based in poor concepts. So they've been watching YouTube, they've been reading articles, they may have misinterpreted something, they may have got information which is a really nice piece of information, but it's not applicable to what they're doing. So we're going through those concepts first, because I find if I don't clear that out first, then we're going to really struggle to get anywhere after that. So there's lots of questions early on. It feels very much like an interview, I think, if you're looking from the outside in. From there, we're going to move into the technical. I want to make sure that the player knows why the club is doing why the ball is doing what it's doing, how's the club interacting with the ball, and thus how they're moving to produce that club movement. And then make sure they understand, well, if we want the ball to do this other thing that we're going to talk about, then the club's got to do this, and then the body's going to have to do this to move the club that way. So I want them to understand the technical of what we're trying to do. In terms of when I get Pam involved, it starts to get about this point. So if I'm asking a player to make moves and they start to struggle with that motion, or they're unable to make the motion, the question that I've got to be thinking about myself is this a coordination issue, or is it a physical issue? Meaning, are they unable to do it because they've just never tried to move in that way before, and then by doing multiple reps, they're a chance to get better at it? Or is it that they physically don't have the tools to move in that way? So if I think it's a physical issue, there's a couple of simple tests that I would do. I use a lot of the TPI stuff, just some simple tests that I would do on the range to give me some clues as to what the player's range of motion is and what they're physically able to do. And at that point, I then have a conversation with the player and I say, well, we're very much at a fork in the road. So we can do one of two things. Option one is we go down the pathway where we deal with the physical. So at the moment, you have this, I believe there's this physical limitation. I never tell them that I'm confident there is. I'd always refer that to Pam to go ahead and make sure that my suspicions are correct. But I sort of know enough, I feel, in this area that I can test someone and have a good idea when I think I'm okay and when I know I need to refer. So I'm never going to do exercise prescription. I'm never going to ask them to do that. I'm always going to refer that to Pam because that's her area of expertise. But I like to think that I know enough that I know when I need to be getting this player in touch with them. So I talked to them about, we're standing at this fork in the road, and which way do we want to go? Do we want to go down the road of we need to get better physically so that you can perform the moves that we want you to do and thus allow you to move more efficiently, get the club on the ball more effectively and produce the ball flights we want? Or do we go down the other road of we're going to play with what you've got and help you score the best you can with the tools you've got available? Now, that could mean that we make some adjustments in setup or grip to change the ball flight. It might not look as textbook maybe as what you would like to see, but it allows the player to get the ball to do closer to what you want to. And then I would stress to them it's going to be a whole lot more short game where additional strength and speed are not as critical to being able to be effective in those shots. So at that point, it's very much a decision by the player as to which way they want to go. If I'm talking with a high school player who wants to play in college or a college player who wants to play beyond, they're more than likely going to be reaching out to Pam, and I'm going to put them in touch with Pam, and we're going to start working together in that way. If it's an adult player who's limited on time, quite often they might go, well, I don't really have the time to do that. I'm struggling to have enough time to work on my golf game as it is. So I'm just going to what can we do to play with what I've got? And then I've got other players who do have the time who are committed to their golf. And again, then I'm going to reach out to Pam. So at that point, we'll talk a little bit more about how I would send them over to Pam. But at the moment, I want to let Pam talk a little bit about why we would be sending players to her and the impact that she can have on them.
Yeah, exactly. So as Derek said, the Fit Pro is going to work from the inside out. And what that means is we're looking at the deepest tissue, not the movement. Well, we look at the movement too, but we look at the deepest tissue in the body to see how it's impacting the movement. So I like to describe the joint space. I work a lot with the joint, and I try to determine, is this person, do they have a healthy body? So you have to be a healthy golfer first. You have to be a healthy human first. Then you need to be able to do the sport. So a lot of times many come to us with health issues, joint issues, previous injuries, and we need to work around those and try to get those better. One of our goals, of course, is to look at to assess the body, to look at the balance, the mobility, the stability, the strength, the speed. We look at health, previous injuries, as I said, and we want to see what's the potential for efficiency, because an inefficient swing, which you guys look at on the kinematic sequence, inefficiency is going to not give the desired effect that you want with the club going, with the ball going far. So let me show you a little bit more about I'm going to share my screen here. I want to show you a little bit more about what I mean by the inside out. So here we go. Give me a second here. Does that look like a presentation? It does. Looks like a presentation. See if I kick that.
Your left foot without moving the toes.
So this
Your left ball
is
foot
a
without moving the toes.
high-level athlete who she's over 6 feet. She's a volleyball player, but I'm using this illustration because I asked her, she can jump fairly well, but I asked her to move her ankle without moving her toes and move her ankle, flex it as far as she could. You don't see me demonstrating, but I'm demonstrating a big ankle motion. And so I need to look at the inside. Hang on one.
Lift your left foot without moving your toes. Flex it as far as it will go. And lower. Lift.
So I'm sure you guys see this. Her ankle doesn't move very well. The reason this is important is because in her sport, just like in golf, your body is doing things in an active or a passive range. And so we look at the inside, like I said, what can her joint do? What can she coordinate and do? So we'll look at, in golf, we're going to go with golf movements, which ankle is one of them. We need to deeply load the ankle in golf. So we're looking at the inside. What can the ankle actively do? What can the trunk and the spine actively do? You see that from the outside, but there's more to it. People want more mobility, so I've got to figure out how to give them more mobility. I need to see, do they have the joint space to do that? If we add more force or more power, is it going to create an injury? So we look at the active and the passive range. The active range is what the person can do and what you always see. So you're not seeing a passive range in a golf session.
Your left foot without moving the toes.
Okay, trying to go to the next
Your
slide.
left foot without moving the toes. Without moving the ball of the foot. Without moving the toes.
Mouse on that screen.
Flex
Try to boost
it as far as
Hang on, sorry about
it will
this.
go. And lower.
Hey, Pam, I have a quick question right quick. So when she came in, what was it that you were seeing from her that made you go test that?
That made me test that was when I did asked her to do a jump or a squat movement. Her knees buckled, and she is over 6 foot, high school, about to go to college. And I was concerned that she was going to have knee issues and knee pain. And
Yeah, so that kind of brings to the next question of when you have some sort of issue in a joint or in a segment of your body, you may not see the bad things come from that joint. It might come from up or down chain, correct?
right, correct. So I'm just trying to look at the efficiency of loading and the demands that are going to be put on the player with more load. So here's another thing. Here is a group of Derek's students that he sent over to me. I'm not gonna you're laughing, but so this is a group of junior golfers. What do you see? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids. What do you see? I see a lot of variety of the ways they use the way they use the ground, right? So, you know, in golf, you need to use the ground to start the swing. So the way their feet use the ground and the way their lower body uses the ground is not always efficient. One of these players was the second one, Henrik.
Mm-hmm.
Much stronger, hit the ball way farther. You could probably tell. The second player hits the ball way farther. You see his jumping style is much more efficient. But these other kids want to hit the ball far, right? This is not something I always look at, but in this case, it was very, showed a lot of contrast. So then I go back with individual players and decide what do we need to do to get better? There's a myth that practicing is going to improve that, but it doesn't improve the passive range. I'm trying to go to the next slide.
Yeah, I think it's
Okay, there we go. So we talked about active passive. So I want you to, where you're sitting right now, unless you're driving like Mr. Pilsner, don't do this, Dave. But if you're sitting, can you make a figure 4 for me with your, either pick a leg, make a figure 4 and look at the angle of your shin. That we can say that that's dictating the angle of the rotation in the hip socket, the angle of the shin. So if you can get horizontal with your shin, you've got a lot of external hip rotation. All right, so this is Arthur, one of our clients. He's an older man and trained with him for many, many years. This is simply displaying a passive hip external rotation, which is what anyone might look at this and anyone might do this for a stretch. So this is a passive stretch, but this is not the range that his hip can go in the golf swing. The range your hip can go in the golf swing is displayed in the active range. So go ahead and keep your leg there, unless it's in pain, and then lift the leg off and look at the angle of your shin now. So it's likely that you lost some of that external hip in the active range. So we have 2 ranges in every joint, active and a passive range. Usually our active is much less. But what comes to you in the golf lesson is someone using their active range. Quite possibly, if they have a lot of power, their powerful segments are going to pull their weaker segments into a passive range, which is a range the player does not own. The passive range is a range that they have more of a chance of getting injured in. So like the lower back gets pulled into a passive range when other segments above and below don't own those ranges. They're limited. So there's a lot of complicated things going on with the body, but that's to me a great way to describe it, is to look at the passive and active. So this is a little bit about how we work. What you see from the outside is the yardage, the ball flight, and what we look at is from the inside. The other thing I think that is a big advantage of using a Pit Pro is because no one is at their peak. No one, not even a player on the PGA Tour. They're not at their peak physical capacity. There's always more that we can get. There's more strength. There's more balance that we can get from right to left throughout the whole body, so that we can bulletproof them from injuries. This illustration I love because this shows how the body works, how a joint, you pick any joint, I don't care which one it is, pick any joint and you have an end range on each side of the joint. And I'll demonstrate. Hopefully you can see my arm. Can y'all see my arm? I'm demonstrating the end range of my elbow joint. My elbow is straight. And now this is the other end range. My elbow is completely bent to the maximum. So at the end range of the straight and the end range of the flex of the elbow, I'm usually a little weaker. I can't absorb load. I can't drive as much force from those end ranges. Think about what we tell people, how we even set up in the golf position. We set up in the mid-range. So at a golf position, you're set up. You're not at your deepest. You're not standing straight up. You're in the mid-range because we are in the ready position, ready to move and ready to drive force. But in the end ranges, it's also where we have less power, less control, and less injuries. I mean, more injuries. That's where we have more injuries in the end ranges. We're more likely, if you'd never pick up 1,000 pounds with a straight arm, you would pick it up like this if you would even try to lift 1,000. But the point is, if you're going to have to pick up something heavy or drive force or drive something, you would go in the mid-range. So, but in training, we try to develop those end ranges so that the length is greater. Because what do we get with power? Everybody wants the ball to go further. Power is simply force, velocity across a longer time or a longer range. That represents mobility. So if we can get someone bulletproof and strong and able to drive force and absorb loads in the end ranges, then we are going to prevent injury. So that's one of our biggest goals, is to prevent injuries. Derek's going to help me with a little illustration. Let me stop sharing.
You minimize that screen draw.
Really?
Yeah, no, I meant that one there.
That one?
No, there you go. Now we're back.
We're back
Yeah,
on.
you can see it.
Okay, Derek. So this would represent, like, people, all your clients want to stretch their spine. So they would round over and stretch their spine this way. Now the spine is more than one joint. So you're only going to be stretching where you stretch. You're only going to be moving where you move. So this represents maybe different sections of the spine or any multi-joint stretch that you do. So the green is where, or these are a lighter band, so it moves more. The blue is a stiffer band, so it doesn't move as much. So we're stretching the whole spine, and you probably can't measure this quite. Let me back up a little. The green definitely moves way more than the blue. So you see the green stretches way more than the blue does. That's exactly what happens in our body when we stretch. And a fitness pro is going to zero in on areas across the spine or other areas in a multi-joint and look at those details, not just look at the total distance from point A to B. We're going to look at things along the whole chain and target areas that aren't moving or areas that can't drive. If it can't move, it's not driving force and it's not absorbing load very well. We look at the active and passive. So I know that's going into a lot of detail. The body is complex, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what we're doing behind the scenes. We're looking at exact things, and then we teach positions, right? We want to be able to, we know the golf position, so we want your clients to be able to go into those positions, and then we teach transitions from position to position. We're looking at the coordination, like Derek said, the coordination of getting from one place to another place. Anyway, so I'm going to pause here. And Derek, you want to talk about some other things, and then I'll share my screen for some other
So I think hopefully that was a nice introduction to what Pam's trying to do on her end. And I thought when I watched that slide, I must admit I'm seeing these slides for the first time this morning myself. But when I'm watching Pam show that active and passive ranges of motion, it explains a lot as to what we're seeing on the tee box when I'm looking on the tee box, and especially it illustrates that why I need to be sending players to Pam, because that's not tests that I'm going to be able to do on the range, and Pam knows those tests for each range, each body segment and ranges of motion that I just don't. So I guess the next step is, well, now how do we go about working together? So, you know, I've got the student on the tee that I'm talking to. We decided we're going to go down the pathway of working with Pam and helping them work on the physical as well as the technical with me. You know, what does that look like? So typically what I would do is I'll take a video of the player from face on and down the line, and I'll do my usual swing analysis that I might send to a student, but I'm going to talk about it in a little different way because this video is going to go to Pam. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what my suspicions are in terms of where I think some physical limitations might be. I'm going to talk about what we're trying to do technically, and I'm going to also talk a little bit about what sort of feedback I'm getting from the student when we're going through those particular motions. So I'm going to send that off to Pam. She's then going to take over from that point, and then I'll let her talk about what she does when she gets the student on her side.
Yeah, so I mentioned power. I know that's what everyone's goal is. I think 100% of everyone that has come to me has said, I want to be powerful, but I don't want to get bulked up. I'm like, don't worry, we're not. I'm like, don't worry, that's not going to happen accidentally, but we're going to definitely try to move you along the power trail to get much more powerful. So I think there is one other thought that on the power that I want to mention is that there are 4 sources of power based on TPI model that they've described where we generate power. And I think sometimes we have, from the outside looking in again, we have someone, let's say they can hit the ball 300 yards. They're 50 years old. They're still hitting it past 300. But that means they're getting power from somewhere. That still does not mean that it's going to last forever, or that they're not eventually maybe overloading some areas of their body. So because we have the 4 sources of power, the first one is vertical thrust. Then it moves into rotary, and that's a lot of the core. And then it moves into arm chopping power, and then wrist forearm power. So that's the sequence of the swing. So we test the power. And maybe this particular player I'm thinking of can hit the ball 300 yards, but he's using 2 sources of power. That means the other 2 sources of power are minimized. They're not effectively being used. They are possibly compromised, not always. I'm not trying to sound like the sky's falling, but possibly over time they're compromised. So what does this player do? They get more clubs. They hit the ball further. They continue to get more power in those 2 areas of the body. And possibly over time, this person could be set up for an injury. And out of nowhere, we wonder why these injuries have occurred. But our job is to try to get the body better balanced so that they can derive and use all 4 areas of power and all of their range, like illustrated in the elbow. We want them to get strong in the end ranges so that they're going to be able to drive force from their biggest stretch position, which is the top of the backswing. It's like an ideal illustration of the load and the stretch cycle before the drive starts happening. Let's see what else. So that's part of the how.
So I think the other thing that's worth mentioning too is that when I send those videos to Pam, I'm always highlighting what is the technical thing that is our highest priority.
Right.
So when Pam gets hold of a student, she'll find a myriad of issues that are wrong, and that's pretty normal for almost every person I'm sure that walks through her door. So from a golfer's perspective, and because the coach is driving the technique on helping the player perform better, it's my responsibility to let her know, well, what are our priorities? You know, what is it that needs to be approached first? Because that's the thing we're trying to accomplish on the tee box. And then she can start hammering away at that and help the player improve in that physical area. I think it's also important, you know, I've had players over the years who will say, well, I'm just going to go work on the physical for a couple of months and then I'll come back and see you. It's like, well, that's not really how it works. We really want to work them in parallel. I've found that players will have patterns that work around what their physical abilities are at that point in time. And if Pam then gives them different physical abilities, those old motor patterns don't necessarily work anymore, number one. And then number two, if we're trying to build new patterns, just because they have the physical abilities to move that way doesn't mean they will. So we've still got to train them to work through that pattern. So I think it's important that you're working in parallel with the fitness professional when they're working together.
Yeah, I always encourage players, because they will say that to me. I think I'm just going to train with you for a while, then I'll go back for a lesson. I don't encourage that. They need to keep playing. They need to keep taking lessons, because it really helps to get it all grooved together. So that's really important. I think there is also a myth out there that the golfers need to groove in just this one motor pattern over and over and over. And that, I wanted to tell you, is a myth. I know it's it's counterintuitive, but research has shown, even back into the 1930s, it was a blacksmith study. So a blacksmith is kind of like a golf swing. They've got to hit this spot. They take an implement and they go back and they hit an exact spot. So a study done in the 1930s has never been contested, because every time it's repeated, we find the same things. We find that the most expert blacksmiths that are able to hit the spot every single time, you would think that they had the exact same swing, so to speak, right? The same strike. They don't. The most expert blacksmiths actually get to the spot in many, many, many ways. So if they've measured the trajectory and drawn the pattern, and they're actually hitting the spot with a large variety of options. So what we say is the more expert player you have, probably the more options they have. And so better joints, more range, more strength, more power and speed from all ranges is going to give your player more options, a healthier joint, and the ability to always get back to the ball. As you know, you're never standing in the exact same spot. The lie is different. The grass is different. They never put their foot in the exact same spot, even though we think we are. We're teaching that. No golf swing is identical. Your better players, your more athletic, your more expert players are getting there with many more options. So the idea that we're grouping in a pattern that is only in this one range is not quite the way we think it is when we examine the actual path.
And I think that's something that we as coaches need to educate our players about too, is that, it's not about being consistent, even though when we practice, we're practicing in an environment which encourages consistency. And what I mean by that is the stance is the same every time, the lie is the same every time, because the players are fluffing it up even if they're on grass, leading to the same target with the same club over and over again. The reality is that that's not what golf is. Golf is, for me, it's about becoming a master of variability. And if you can do that, then you need these physical tools that Pam's talking about so that you can handle those different situations and still return the club to the ball with a level of precision that you need to be able to control the golf ball. There was a question we had up there.
Yeah.
Grab that next
I think it was asking about foundations of power.
Pam, when you get a second, what are the 4 foundations of power from TPI? Not sure if you answered this yet.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ryan.
The four ways we drive power. It starts at the ground, and that is vertical thrust. So we test vertical, and that literally is vertical. So, and I've tested all levels of players. I tested a whole U of H golf team at one point, probably 6, 7, 8 years ago. I got them for a day. And as you could imagine, their verticals were in the high 20s, low 30s. And I told Jonathan Dismuke, I said, I'm going to tell you who I think are hit the ball the furthest after all this testing. I said, don't tell me who they are, but I'm going to guess the top players that I think hit the ball the furthest. And so we test vertical. And average tour is 18 to 22 inches. 18 to 22 inches. Now your Dustin Johnsons, your Bubba Watsons, the players that hit it the furthest, they're hitting it, their verticals are in the high 20s, low 30s, and all your long drive guys are in the 30s. So that's the first source of power. The second source is rotary, and that is your separation between upper lower body. It's a sequencing that starts, it's the hip turn and the trunk turn. And we test that in a couple of ways. We test it with a shot put throw, right and left. We also get a sense of what the spine can do with a sit up and throw. And the sit up and throw is 18 to 24 feet is the tour average. So then we test also arm chopping is the third source of power. We get a sense of that with the sit up and throw and with the chest pass. And the fourth source is wrist forearm. That's your last lever that determines the club face. And we get a sense of that from your chest pass and from your shot put throw. Now each segment builds in force and starts with the most force, then it builds in speed and moves the furthest. So the first segment doesn't move as far. The actual hip lift, I know you measure that with the, what's it called?
3D.
Yeah, but what's the other one called? KVS, yeah,
KVS.
KVS. So hip lift average is about a couple of inches, I believe, or 1.5 inches for average player. Your long drive guys or your heavy hitters, their feet are leaving the ground. Their hip lift is 4 to 6 inches sometimes. That's but in the actual vertical measurement that we check is 18 to 24 for average. Anyway, does that answer your question, Brian?
Yes. What was the third one you said?
Arm chopping.
So
Arm chop.
So just the downward force that you're
Arm chopping.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Each segment builds in speed. So, there are other ways to measure speed. I can't measure speed. I measure that way. I can measure strength. I have ways of measuring strength. I don't have ways of measuring speed per segment, but we certainly work on speed for sure.
You good with that section?
Yeah, good.
So I guess I want to move into just like some of the concerns that I've heard over the years from people who have hesitation or fears about working with the fitness professional. And I think to me, it starts with communication. So I think it's important that you have good communication between the fitness professional and the golf professional so that you both know what your roles are with the player and that you're then both moving in the same direction. And along with that, one of the fears I've heard is that will the fitness professional start trying to have the player change their technique rather than the golf coach stick with the technique. So I have found with all the fitness professionals I've worked with over the years, they don't talk technique. For the same reasons that I don't talk golf fitness. Like, although the fitness professional does have a solid understanding of, if you're working with the right fitness professional, they have a solid understanding of how the golf swing works. That's not their area of expertise. And even though I have an understanding of how the body's going to work, it's not my area of expertise. So if you're working with the right fitness professional, I will word it this way, that I and the fitness professional will stay in their own lane, if you will, and then we will communicate with each other considerably so that we continue to work together as a team to help the professional. And do you find that as well, Pam?
Yeah, I don't want to teach the golf swing. And I'm not qualified, that's for sure.
So with that in mind, then it's like, well, how do you then find the right fitness professional to work with? So if I was moving to a new city, I mean, I was very fortunate when I moved here to Houston that Pam was already on property, and I've got an expert on site, which is awesome for me, but I appreciate that that's not normal for many facilities. The first place I'd be going is probably my TPI, and I would be looking at their search engine there to see who's in my area. The things that I was looking for when I was looking at that is I'm looking for fitness professionals, number one, and then secondly, I'm looking for fitness professionals who have done multiple certifications with TPI. If they've just done level one, then to me, what they've done is they're just dabbling in it and they want to go see what it's about, and that's great. But then I'm looking for the fitness professional who has made more of a commitment to the golf side of things. So if they've done level 3, level 2, level 3 on the golf side, or even on anything to do with TPI, but beyond level 1, that's someone that I'm going to reach out to. Once I've reached out to them, my job would ideally be to go and meet them. I want to go, preferably have a screening done by them on me, even if I've got to pay for it, because I want to see what the experience is going to be like for my player if I'm going to refer them to them. And then after I've done that screening, I would want to have a meeting with them and say, okay, well, I really like the way we did this. This is what I'm looking at doing with my players. Are you open to me sending players to you? How do you see that interaction working? And just making sure that it's a fit. And you might have to talk to a number of different fitness professionals before you find one that you're really comfortable working with. But that would be the way I would go about it. And then you may be fortunate enough that if you've got players that are spread out, you might need fitness professionals in different areas of the city or wherever you are. And then I'd still be doing the same thing. If I can't meet with them in person, do a screening, I'd definitely be wanting to have some sort of in-depth call and try and find out what their philosophies are and what they're trying to do. Ben, you correct me if I'm wrong, but like in the golf coaching side, I see there is in the fitness side, as the fitness professional side as well. There are those who are really good, well-educated, know what they're doing. And there's those that are still younger, or maybe not as committed, haven't gone down the rabbit hole as much as you want them to. So by having those conversations, you can find the right fit for you and your players.
True. It's, there are good ones in every field.
Yes, absolutely.
And more knowledgeable ones in every field, for sure.
So with that being said, has anyone got any questions for us this morning? You can either unmute and ask a question, or if you want to type something in, please do.
I will tell, while you're coming up with questions, if you've got any, I will say, some examples of what's happened over the past couple of weeks is I had a player, a junior player come in. His golf coach happens to be in Australia. I don't know if you know. But his golf coach, so I found like 8 things that we were working with, and we meet every 2 weeks, and we're going through, all these different things. He's in pretty good shape. But his golf coach sent the message to me last week that he really doesn't like his trail arm at the top of the backswing. He really didn't feel like he had a good position. But when I tested it, it was okay. So that's an example of where, that wouldn't be a concern for me, but because the golf coach sent me that message, we went and we worked on it, and I prioritized that in the session. And the player came back and said, this feels so much better. This is amazing, all this kind of stuff. So I haven't heard back yet from his golf coach, but that's an example how we can work together. And my priorities are the best that I have, but with communication, I can get more priorities. And I guess many of you know Robert Scott. He's very public about what we're doing and allows me to share his private fitness results. And he's going to be playing in the PGA Championship in April.
The Club Pro GPO in April.
Yeah, in April. It's coming up soon. So we've been working together since November, I think, and he's made some great progress. His ankles are really limited. I mean, really.
We're going to share that. Sorry, Robert.
It's okay. No, he said his ankles are very limited, and we've been working on those feet. I'm telling you. They're getting better. They're getting better. But that's the loading that he needs. That's where the power, first source of power starts. So.
But I was talking with Robert the other day, and he was talking about how much he's feeling like he's hitting it really well. So he's happy with where his game's at. So the work you guys have done has played off nicely.
Yeah. So y'all can follow up a lot about that.
So when it comes to we have corrective stuff that you're doing versus developmental. So ideally, we want it to be more developmental. So like you're doing with those juniors, trying to get them into a program or involved in the program that kind of just helps those things get better. What does that look like? And I guess, where do you separate that? How do you separate that?
Yeah. So it's where the player wants to go. When they're in a group setting, we're working on the most common corrective things, but we're also doing developmental things. Like I do a golf mobility class, and we are doing everyone needs better hip mobility. Everyone needs spine separation, right? Everyone needs stronger shoulder rotation, strong wrist. So we hit all those hot areas that everyone needs more of. That would be developmental and corrective combined. And then when I work with someone privately, then we can dig in and get into specific priorities, 1, 2, 3, whatever their top priorities are. If there's a potential for injury, I mean, Derek sent me some players before where just the amount of power they have, the high level they're playing, the amount of hours of practice they're doing. A couple of them, both of the ones I'm thinking of, a male and a female, high level juniors or, late juniors, or wrist issues. I'm really concerned about those wrist issues. And so more practice, adding 2 to 3 to 6 hours more practice a week is not going to help their wrist. They can practice without going, they can practice their game and get their body in way better shape without hitting balls. But yeah, so corrective versus just developmental, it kind of blends. But when you're in a group setting, we try to make it fun. I try to work on what the player wants, keep their top goal in mind. It's usually distance. So I actually add speed work to my mobility training. So we can go into the in range and we can initiate fast twitches into a deeper, quicker range. So we add speed work in the in range. Everyone loves that. So we work on just as much as we can get in the time that I'm given.
Awesome. Thank you. One more question. Obviously, we're all pretty enamored with Ball Go Far.
Right.
Which, I mean, like, everything's shown that if we can hit it farther and still have an idea where it's going, we should shoot lower scores. So it's very understandable why people do it. And I think we should all, even personally as our own golfers, we should probably be trying to do that too, just because it helps us give us some insight on what our clients and our students and our athletes are going to have to go through to get it. So one of my questions for you is, Bryson's obviously kind of got everything in like super buzz mode right now.
Right.
So there's the old school way of thinking that says, working on my body and building all this mass is a bad thing. But yet, I guess one of my questions and where my thought goes is, I don't think he can create those types of gains that he did without doing that. So helping people understand how, yes, you need to have that, but you can't miss the flexibility, mobility, coordination side of things. So how do you get them to understand, hey, yes, you do need this if you really want that, but we need some compliance on this side first.
It's a hard sell, but even Bryson, top level athletes, MLB players spend a ton of time on that mobility, stability. Usually I show them examples of, how strength really is stability. Here's an example I happen to have right here. I use this band to show it. So we could say the red band illustrates a stretch or a movement, right? So the muscle stretching, the joint angle changes. So this is what we focus on. This would be the club head, the hand, right? This is moving. We're focused on that. But what's happening over here with this hand? I'll tell you, this hand over here is working way harder than this one. I'm having to stabilize this side. So this is strength. And this is where keeping your body stable against force is strength. The other thing, that's a hard sell. So I showed these kind of illustrations. The other thing is a cannon. If you take a cannon, you look at the heaviness of the cannon, it shoots the cannonball far. Why is the cannon so heavy? The cannon's so heavy because it needs to be stable. And that creates and gives the option of mobility. But if you put the cannon on a canoe, it's now unstable, and the cannonball, as you would know, I've never done it, but it was not going to go very far, right? Because the cannon is now sitting on a canoe and it's unstable. So teaching the stable and mobile portion of it, people start to get it. And if they try it a little bit, they realize how hard it is. It looks like we're doing nothing sometimes if you look from the outside in, but when you actually try it and do it, you realize that it's eye-opening. The things that you thought you could do that you start to understand you can't do. So yes, it is a hard sell, but it does help that tour players are talking about it. And Bryson actually said, I started noticing this years ago because he said some buzzwords. I'm not sure everybody heard them, but I did, because he kept saying, I'm training in the in range. He kept saying the in ranges. I'm not sure. I don't have the quote in front of me, but he would say, I'm training in the in ranges. I'm like, what? Because that's nothing that I've heard other tour players say. And I teach in the in range. I teach a lot in the in range. So I grasped that word. And so I'm able to now say that he's doing that. And so that helps me create the buy-in.
I think Ramsey McMaster was probably the first one that he said something to me, and this is obviously years ago, and it's kind of part of the deal now. He goes, we all work on trying to figure out how to create all these accelerators and all these go things, but you got to realize that you got to have something that can put the brakes back on that system as well, which is that whole stability portion that you're talking about. And that, like, I never thought about it that way, but you take the best race car with the biggest, 750 horsepower, and all of a sudden the brakes don't work. Well, you know what? That's a crash waiting to happen, right?
Yeah. And that's what I mean by absorb load. So when you have to absorb the loads that are going through the body, and when someone has some areas that don't move, or they get pulled into that passive range, you don't own that position. You are being pulled into a position. It's like sliding on ice. You go into the splits. You don't own that position. You went there. You don't own it. Something bad might happen.
So now what about when you get into people that have, let's say, some sort of birth defect, like, we've heard about John Rahm talking about it, and I've got a kid that was born with a club foot, or people that go through these traumatic injuries in their life to where the reality of being able to get range back the way that they want to in that joint is just not going to happen. So
Yeah.
how does the golf coach and the fitness coach start trying to figure out, hey, well, we can do these things to work around that and still make the rest of it look the way we want?
Just that. I mean, you go to the deepest tissue that is still available. So a hip replacement, a knee replacement, you go to the next tissue that's available. So I started the deepest tissue, that becomes the joint. And then you train that. So you want that to be strong and stable. You want options. You want as many options as you can so that the ranges are there. So in all areas of the whole chain, let's say the knee is not you have a knee replacement or you have a knee injury or something severe in the knee, you would really want to get those ankles and hips working well. So that's above and below the area. So that is, those areas are going to take the brunt of it.
Can you explain the difference between, or I think one of the things that I hear people talk about sometimes, and I think it's misunderstood, is as soon as we say the word stable, their brain goes to, okay, don't move, glue it down, don't let it do things. Can you explain how, like, what that means, what stability really means?
Stability can be described as tension. So if I'm going to push on Derek right here.
Sure.
I'm going to use it as an. So the more I push, I'm starting to push harder. I'm starting to push harder. My chair is now rolling. So there's no stability over here, but he's not moving, right? So he's having to, what are you having to do to stay stable?
Cause contracting.
Okay. He's creating tension. So I like to describe it as tension. And, your amateurs can't create tension like a stronger athlete can. Strength, tension starts in their deepest tissue. It starts with the nervous system, the ability to do it. And that's nervous system. It's also the white tissue, your joints, your fascia, your ligaments, tendons, and it's red tissue. I think from the outside looking in, those that aren't in the field with, like I am, they only think of the muscles. And so they just think train the muscles, but it's really the nervous system is the first involved. And so we have to train how to develop and drive tension. And just like he had to do. And so that's, to me, what stability is. It's the ability to brace against forces that are pushing on you. So the body, the spine has to develop tension and be able to fire to absorb loads. I'll mention that over and over. That's what we do in the golf swing. Those are great questions, Alan. Great questions. Anybody else?
Just about to say the same thing. Anyone else
Yeah.
have questions this morning? All right. I think we're done.
I think we're about done. Listen, I'd love to invite anyone to reach out to me. I would love to discuss anything further with you about working with a fitness pro. There are a lot of them in the state of Texas and South Texas. I guess most of you guys are somewhere in South Texas. So I'd be happy to help you with anything you need. And I just owe a lot of gratitude to the golf industry. Back in the day in 2007, when I hung out my golf fitness shingle officially, I dabbled in it before when I hung that shingle out and specialized in golf. Many of you, Alan, Neil Wilkins, Dave Pilsner, a lot of you guys sent people to me and still do. And I really appreciate that. I think working with everyone as a team has been It's been a great experience, and I'm very appreciative of the golf professional.
And Pam, is the best way for people to find you just through Pam Owens Fitness through your website?
Yeah, my website. You can reach out on any social media platform too. I do check that daily.
Okay. And if anyone's got any questions for me, obviously Royal Oaks is the best way to reach me. And if you want to Google Derek Cooper Golf, you can find me pretty easily that way too. But thanks everyone for being on the call this morning. I appreciate you all being here. Thanks all for the questions. Have a great day and look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Derek.
You bet.
Thank you.